"Sir, this ship doesn't take tourists." The young officer's tone was firm but dismissive, his hand rising to bar the way for the man standing quietly at the base of the USS Horn's ramp. Around them, officers and enlisted sailors moved with purpose, filing past the old man without a second glance. He didn't protest, didn't explain, just stepped back, eyes locked on the vessel that loomed above him like a relic from another life. No one there knew who he was. No one realized they had just turned away the only man who might actually understand that ship better than anyone still walking her decks. Thomas Hollis never broke routine, even now, long retired from active duty. His body moved with the same discipline drilled into him decades ago. Long before the alarm clock buzzed, he was already awake, sitting at the edge of his bed in a modest Norfolk apartment, his feet meeting the cold floor. The old radiator rattled to life, more noise than heat. He didn't mind. The cold didn't bother him. It was part of the rhythm. In the narrow galley kitchen, a slow-working drip coffee maker pushed steam into the air. Next to it sat his one and only mug, deep navy blue with the U.S. Navy emblem worn but intact. He'd been using that same mug every day since returning to civilian life. At 62, Thomas lived mostly alone. A few old friends remained former shipmates. Scattered across the country, some called on birthdays, others just sent messages when memory served. But consistency, that was his closest companion now. He scraped by on small contracts, fixing civilian marine engines. He had the skills, just not the demand. On the living room shelf sat only a few keepsakes, a scale model of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, a faded photograph of young men in combat gear standing shoulder to shoulder on a steel deck, and a metal plaque, tarnished but polished weekly. It read, USS Horn, the indomitable cruiser. He treated that plaque like it was alive, like it still breathed sea air, and carried the stories etched into every bulkhead. The USS Horn, DLG-30. Decommissioned years ago, brought back recently to serve as a floating tactical training base. Thomas found out by chance a small typed bulletin pinned to a board near one of the docks, where he occasionally worked. It read plainly, authorized visits only, USS Horn, Pier 7. That morning, Thomas made the journey by bus across the city, then walked the final stretch to the pier. The wind coming off the water was sharp, carrying the familiar scent of rust, diesel, and salt. When the Horn came into view, something inside him tightened. There she was, her profile unchanged. The gray steel, the elegant lines of utility over beauty, the tower, the bow, the hull. Above her command deck, the American flag danced in the wind. Beneath it, stenciled letters Horn, faded but stubborn. Thomas stood still for a moment, letting it all soak in. Then, with a breath that trembled but never faltered, he stepped forward. The sounds met him like old friends creaking ropes, the slap of water against steel, distant voices giving orders. A group of Naval Academy cadets was arriving, flanked by officers and trainers. He approached quietly, holding a folded sheet of paper in one hand. That's when the young officer stopped him. "Sir, this ship doesn't take tourists." Thomas didn't respond. He just looked at the ship again, taking in the details. No one else noticed the minor tension in the mooring lines, the soft hum in the auxiliary systems, an uneven vibration from the backup generator. He saw the ship in a language no one else could speak anymore. Without a word, he slipped the paper back into his pocket and turned away. It was just another day, but that day they made a mistake. 2 days later, he returned, this time without stepping forward. He stood further back, just watching. The Horn was still docked, towering and alive with activity. New rivals were preparing to board for a scheduled tactical drill. Cadets in uniform, instructors, tech crews. On the deck, directing the operation, was the same officer, McConnell, his name stitched above the pocket on his uniform. Thomas had no plan to approach. He just watched. Then something caught his attention. A man in a white linen suit was speaking with 2 technicians at a side panel near the stern. The blue badge on his chest marked him as a contractor. They were pointing at an old auxiliary connection, a forgotten system, not meant to handle the load they were preparing for. Thomas stepped forward without thinking. "Excuse me," he said calmly. That looks like the old thermal control. Bypass if you're running a direct feed through there. You're going to overload the propulsion system's auxiliary sensors. The men turned to look at him. One technician squinted, skeptical. The man in the suit raised an eyebrow. "Do you work here?" "Sir, no," Thomas replied, steady and unbothered. "But I can show you how to route it safely, if you let me." The younger technician folded his arms, already on the defensive. "We've got an engineering team. They'll handle it." Before Thomas could answer, McConnell's voice cut across the pier. "Is there a problem here?" The technician spoke first. "This man's trying to instruct our team." "He's not." "Cleared," McConnell approached, face unreadable. "Sir, you were already told this is a restricted area. We can't have civilians interfering with operations." "I understand," Thomas said softly. "Just trying to help you avoid a costly mistake." McConnell stepped closer. His words were careful, his tone colder than necessary. "I need you to leave now." Thomas looked back at the ship. He could see at the overloaded systems, the signal discrepancies, the risk. He could have fixed it in 10 minutes, but he said nothing more. "Are you still using the original cooling loop, or did you patch it to the redundant?" He asked one last time. "That's not your concern," McConnell replied, his voice final. Thomas gave a slow nod. "Of course, my apologies." He turned and walked away, slower this time. Not because of age, but because every step felt like carrying the weight of something that didn't want to be left behind him. McConnell spoke into his radio. "Control, this is McConnell. Civilian approaching restricted panel. He's leaving now, no threat. Just log the interaction." As Thomas moved past the bow, he reached out and let his hand brush the cold steel. It was like touching a ghost from his past, an old friend no one else remembered. On ships like this, Thomas had lived 100 lifetimes, and now no one even knew his name. Of all the things Thomas Hollis had fixed in his life, from jammed rudders to full-scale propulsion failures, it never crossed his mind that the hardest thing to repair might be belief. He had given decades to the Navy, serving during emergencies, when every second mattered. But here, standing at the foot of the USS Horn once again, none of it seemed to count. The crew brushed past him like he didn't exist. Just a civilian now. Unwelcome, unrecognized. By morning, fate had spoken louder than any credentials. A critical failure disrupted a training exercise on board. The central thermal control system overloaded, burning through to key panels and tripping automatic shutdown protocols. The crew had to evacuate the lower levels as a precaution. No one was injured, but the incident left the ship inoperative. The report filed afterward outlined exactly the issue Thomas had tried to warn them about, ignored, and dismissed. Lieutenant McConnell found himself summoned by Admiral Hillard, a seasoned leader with eyes sharpened by over 4 decades of service. "Lieutenant, how did this happen under your engineer's watch?" Hillard asked. "We're not sure, sir, and currently no one knows how to repair it." There was hesitation in his voice before he added, "Sir, there was a civilian yesterday. He mentioned something similar, but he wasn't authorized. I had him removed." The Admiral's tone cooled. "What was his name?" McConnell blinked. "I'm not sure, sir." Hillard turned to his console and pulled up the Horn's original technical specifications. At the bottom of the file, a familiar name stared back. Thomas Hollis, Chief Supervisor. 3 tours aboard this very ship. Commendations for crisis repairs. Final Navy notes. Highly technical, natural leader, invaluable in emergencies. Get him back, Hillard ordered. By mid-morning, McConnell was chasing a ghost. Thomas wasn't listed in current Navy records, had no known contact number, and no fixed address. Someone recalled he'd been doing small repair jobs around the Norfolk shipyard. Finally, a technician reported spotting him at the marina working quietly off the books, fixing boat engines. McConnell didn't send someone else. He went himself. Thomas was where he always seemed to be, elbow deep in engine grease, hunched over a grounded fishing boat, reading glasses dangling from his shirt collar. At the lieutenant's approach, he looked up and gave a nod of recognition. "Hollis," McConnell began. Thomas wiped his hands. No words were needed between them. McConnell simply asked, "Would you meet me at Pier 7, 3 p.m.? I'll be there." And he was. This time, when Thomas stepped aboard the Horn, no one tried to stop him. Hillard stood waiting on deck with McConnell and two engineers. The Admiral reached out his hand. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Hollis. I never meant to cause trouble," Thomas said cautiously. "You didn't," Hillard replied. Then he turned to the others. "This man installed the system you destroyed yesterday. He knew this ship before any of you were in uniform." McConnell stepped forward, regret written on his face. "Mr. Hollis, I was wrong. I dismissed your experience and treated you like an outsider. I'm sorry." Thomas paused. The young officer wasn't offering excuses, just honesty. "You did what you thought was right, Lieutenant." Hillard didn't wait. "Hollis, we need you. Would you assist the technical team?" Thomas looked around the deck, places he used to walk barefoot during long nights at sea. Memories. Preston quietly. There was no way he could say no. In the control room, the failure still pulsed under the surface. New panels had been installed, but the compensation system was unstable. No one could figure it out. Thomas ran a hand along the main console. "This component, is it a modified version of the original?" One engineer nodded. "Yes, the original was discontinued. We improvised." Thomas crouched, inspecting the wiring. "This insulation's too thin. The moment the ship hits open water, moisture will creep in. It'll fail again soon." He pointed out the steps: isolate and reconnect the autothermal control, recalibrate the sensors, reroute the bypass to the secondary board. As he spoke, it became clear this wasn't just repair, it was reunion. The ship was his old companion, and he understood it in a way manuals never could. By sundown, everything was running. Perfect readings, full stability. In the briefing room, Admiral Hillard stood before the team. "Most of you learned by reading technical guides. Hollis learned through sleepless nights when men's lives depended on his hands. That's the difference." Days later, the USS Horn completed its first full emergency simulation at sea since reactivation. Not a single fault. Every system performed flawlessly. The official report bore a rare annotation from Hillard himself. Success largely due to the unmatched expertise of Mr. Thomas Hollis. His deep understanding of the Horn's foundations proved essential. Thomas sat at his kitchen table when he read those words, printed and hand-delivered by a young sailor with strict instructions to give it to him personally. He didn't say much, just folded the paper and slid it into a weathered envelope among old letters, receipts, and black and white photographs. The next morning, just after dawn, the Horn was scheduled to depart for its open sea revalidation mission. The sky was still painted in deep blue with thin streaks of orange. Gulls circled above, and the water shimmered with early reflections from the dockside lights. Thomas arrived early, stood back from the main activity, watching with the calm detachment of someone who had already lived these moments 100 times before. All he brought with him was an old, faded Navy cap from the upper deck. McConnell saw him and made his way down. He greeted him with a quiet smile. "You came to say goodbye. Couldn't miss it," Thomas replied. They stood side by side as the crew made final checks, loaded supplies, and ran tests. "You know," McConnell said, "you could have been part of this voyage. The team wanted you there." "I already was," Thomas said. "A long time ago. Now it's your turn." McConnell nodded slowly. "Thank you for everything. Not just what you taught us, but how you taught it." Minutes later, the Horn's engines roared. Mooring lines slipped free. The steel vessel slid forward through the water like something reborn, a giant coming awake. Thomas didn't move. He watched every inch the ship traveled, his eyes tracking it like a father seeing his child take a first step. He touched the brim of his cap, pressed it gently to his chest. It wasn't for anyone else, just for him. A final salute to a ship he had once helped save, now sailing forward on her own. And as the Horn disappeared into the horizon, Thomas stood still, because part of him was sailing with her.